I underdressed for Toronto. This is all I had. And I walked over here from the hotel. It's about a mile walk, and I was freezing. It's 70 degrees Fahrenheit back in the Bay Area. And I am American, so please don't hold that against me. I heard a few comments earlier today about the president. Today I'm going to talk about brand relevance, and I think it's important to think about this from a big, if you're a large enterprise company and you're trying to reach B2B customers, or you're a small to medium-sized company trying to reach consumers. Social data is hugely important. Now, I don't know about you, but I suck at math, okay? My wife does not let me manage the finances. I struggle trying to help my 8th grade daughter with her homework, her math homework, and I use those online calculators where you punch in like one number, then you punch in another number, and then calculates the percent change. Anybody else do that? Okay, good. So the great news is you don't have to be a data scientist to use data, because there's tools out there, there's calculators out there. The skill that you need to learn as a marketer is to take data, mine the data, understand the data, and then make decisions from that, okay? So before I get started, just again, Michelle, thank you for inviting me here today. Thank you, Pinch Social. Toronto is one of my favorite cities in the world, been here many times. I always underdress, unfortunately. I think I might have to go buy a jacket on the way back. I've been doing this for a long time. So I've worked in-house at large companies like Intel and Yahoo, and I've worked for agencies like Edelman. I'm now at Zeno Group, which is an integrated agency where we are using data to really inform everything that we do from a marketing and communications perspective. So that's me, and I can make these slides available to you if you'd like. Just let me know. I'll be also out there after the session answering any questions. Let me start off by painting an interesting picture for you. These things happen every minute on the internet, okay? So 3.7 million searches in Google, almost $1 million in sales per minute on Amazon and other retailers, 14,000 long-form articles and blogs being written. If you have to look at this holistically, there is a content and media surplus in the market. There's just a lot of content, and they're all vying for your attention. Now, we as humans have very low attention spans, okay? We're multitasking, we're taking photos, we're on multiple devices. When we're watching Netflix or others, we're looking at our computer or our mobile phone, and sometimes we have to kind of rewind because we're trying to do too many things. This is a study from 2015. 8 seconds is our attention span. So think about this from a marketing perspective. You have all this content, you're trying to reach a certain consumer, and you have very little attention span as a consumer. Tunnel vision is common. When I was in the market to buy a car, all of a sudden I saw Toyota ads, and I heard Toyota conversations, and Honda ads, and BMW. And the minute that I purchased my car and drove off the car lot, I did not see any of those ads. I still don't see those ads, yet they are all around me. But they're irrelevant to me. And we have tunnel vision because we can only consume a finite amount of information at a given time. The buyer's journey, whether you work in B2B or consumer, is unpredictable. The way that we consume content is unpredictable, right? When I get to work in the morning, I open up my laptop, I open up Chrome, and I dynamically opens up, my Gmail account, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm in between meetings, I'm checking my phone, I'm looking at my notifications, I'm looking at my DMs, I'm looking at who's viewed my profile on LinkedIn, and it's all kind of random. I can't even tell you the way I'm going to consume content or the way that I buy, whether it's a pair of shoes or an investment in a stock or a jacket, if you will. Okay, so the buyer's journey is unpredictable, and can we all agree that Google is the homepage of the internet? Okay, so think about these things for a minute and try to put yourself into a position where you are trying to reach your audience with an ad program or a campaign or just the day-to-day engagement. The woman from Twitter talked earlier about, if you're a small to medium-sized business, how do you grow an audience? And she's absolutely right. You start off by engaging with people. I would say find the influencers first and engage with them, right? And there's different ways to do that. So there's a content and media surplus, attention span is this much, and the delta between the two is astronomical. So you have to ask yourself again, how do you break through the clutter? Now, internally, we have other challenges, right? If you work for large companies, or even a small to medium-sized companies, these are some things that you may encounter day to day, right? Internal resources are limited. You may not have the right folks who can write content. You may not have a creative team internally. You may not understand what that broader narrative is. And so the question we ask ourselves is, how do we break the clutter? How do we reach the right consumer at the right time and in the right channel, okay? And I say that it starts with data, okay? Again, I want to reiterate that you do not have to be a data scientist or even passed algebra in college or university like I didn't to understand this. Some sources of data include primary research, right? And I think a lot of companies today, because we're on social and, it's like this online, focus group where we can pull data from if you're using Crimson Hexagon or Spreadfast or Sprinkler or what have you, it kind of pulls in all this data. Primary research is still important. Finding out what customers are saying, what they're doing, and why they're doing it is still important. There's media coverage, there's web analytics if you're using Google Analytics, there's CRM data, there's audience data, and then there's social conversations. And this is what it becomes. The what plus the why becomes defendable intelligence. The what is the social data, right? That is going to tell you how many people are talking about your brand, how many are interested in artificial intelligence or sneakers or shoes. The why, the primary research is going to tell you the why. Why do you prefer to read the New York Times versus the Wall Street Journal? Why do you prefer Nike over Adidas? Why do you prefer black jackets versus brown jackets, okay? So the combination of those two data sources is what I call defendable intelligence, okay? So I want to kind of transition and tell you how I view the market. This is the 1-9-90 model of influence. And if you think about a market, the market could be defined however you define it. It could be single mothers in Toronto with one child who prefer rap music. It could be companies that need security software who are under $100 million in revenue per year. It could be millennials in Toronto who like draft beer or craft beer and a certain type of country music, if you will. So however you define the audience, 1% of that audience drives the conversation. Years ago, it was the journalists, it was the media and analysts. Today, it's still them, but it's also influential people, right? Influential people who have a perspective and a point of view and have an audience that's listening, okay? That's the 1%. The 9% is kind of the core audience. Let me go back a second. The 1% of that market creates content. They are thought leaders. They are creating categories. If you ever heard the term digital transformation, has anybody ever heard that term? If you work in enterprise or B2B, you probably have. That term in itself was created by an influencer years ago. So they're creating buzzwords, they're creating markets. The 9% of that market typically takes that content, takes the 1% when they're creating content, repackages it, provides their perspective on it, and shares it. Okay? The 90%, that's kind of everybody else. That's the market. You're going to reach the 90% if you have $10 million a year in paid spend or advertising. You can reach them directly. And the work that I've done is focused primarily on the 1 and 9%, because if you can reach the 1 and 9%, you can essentially reach the entire market without spending millions of dollars in paid media to do so. Okay, so the 1-9-90 is very important, and this is really how content travels, right? You reach that one person, and it's not just one influencer that's going to help drive your brand relevance. It's a multitude of influencers. Some of them are paid influencers. Some of those are influencers that you are going to find on Snapchat or Instagram or Twitter, or we know that there's a new Vine 2.0 that's coming out pretty soon. If you can create engagement with that 1%, you're going to essentially reach the entire market. And that 90%, let me just reiterate, the 90% of that market, they use Google for everything. They read reviews. They essentially help quantify that 1 and 9%, whether or not they are doing a good job at effectively telling your brand story, if that's what you're trying to have them do. Now, this is a model, it's a very linear model, but this is the way I kind of look at the world, right? You have all this data, you have different work streams. Now, working for an integrated agency, a lot of times one of our PR clients will say, hey, well, we just want this, or we're just interested in this, and we don't do paid media. We just reach out to media, influencers or journalists, and so we leave paid media up to that group over there. okay, which I think is a huge mistake. And we need to get beyond that frame of mind. So when I look at all these very disparate work streams like earned and strategic paid media, influencer activation, real-time content, branded journalism, they all need to be in sync. There's data that tells us that in order for us to change behavior, we need to reach consumers 3 to 5 times. And what that means is throughout their journey every day, scrolling through their feeds and Googling information and having conversations, they need to have interaction with your brand somehow, either through hearing, listening, seeing, reading. So it's important that all of these work streams are integrated. One story told multiple different ways. Okay, I want to talk about the influencer audience because this is really where I get excited. Again, we're talking about the 1% of a given market. Now, the way that I look at how we basically quantify influence are 4 factors. The first is relevance. In other words, how often and this one says reach, but I'm just going to start over here. Relevance. How often are they talking about the topics important to your company or your brand? Did they mention it once 2 years ago? Or are they consistently and ongoing talking about these topics? Resonance. When they create content, how far does it travel on the internet? Do people like their content? And you can look at through share data whether or not someone likes a long-form article or a tweet or a video or an update in LinkedIn and Facebook. So does it resonate with their audiences? Reference is, are they being referenced by other influencers? Because we know that influence is interesting. There's a lot of influencers are making themselves appear to be more influential than what they are, right? There was an article in Adweek years ago, or a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, where influencers are renting out private jets and taking pictures of them, making them appear to be important. Okay, so if they're being referenced by other influencers, that's one validation that they are influential. And last is reach, and I say that purposely. Just because an influencer has 1 million followers doesn't make them important. They may not move the needle for you. You need to understand all these 4 elements in order for you to find out who that 1% is and how you activate them across the ecosystem. Now, from a B2B context, there's multiple tiers of influence. You have your analyst community, right? Gartner, Forrester, IDG. You have your traditional media, those who write for, Entrepreneur, Inc., New York Times, Wall Street Journal. You have your industry associations, your TEDx speakers, those who are involved in nonprofit or NGOs who are influential and about certain topics. Then you have your tech enthusiasts, right? Your columnists, and you can even break that down into micro-influencers. I saw an article yesterday called nano-influencers. It's kind of a new term. And it's all broken down by fashion and music. And, my daughter, she's 13, and she watches all these videos on YouTube of young women putting on makeup and different techniques and tutorials. And, I mean, she's watching them nonstop, 24/7. That's a different group of influencers, right? So, again, I think black and white. It helps me kind of process information. So this is how I categorize it, but there's so many different ways to categorize influencers. This is an influencer profile. Okay, these are real people. Lillian Pearson, she's big data girl on Twitter. This is a profile, and I'm going to be honest with you. Some clients will pay us $30,000 for one report that says, who are the top influencers in artificial intelligence? And it may take 2-3 weeks to run this data, and then we provide them with profiles just like this, which is like a snapshot of who this person is. So Lillian, you can see how large her network is across channels. Total mentions and share of mentions, it's kind of complicated. I could talk to you about that outside. She's been mentioned in The Guardian, Forbes, ZDNet. So someone had either quoted her or talked about her movement in the industry. The upper right-hand box, the size of the box represents volume. So you can see here that she talks a lot about AI or artificial intelligence. She talks a little bit about automation, a little bit about quantum, future of work, and then more about IoT. Now, this is important from a brand perspective. Now kind of put this in the context of the industry you work in, okay? Fashion or music or entertainment. Understanding the volume of conversation tells me, as a marketer, how I might want to engage with Lillian. She's probably more open to engaging with me on a piece of collaborative content if it's about AI and data science or machine learning, more so than automation. Okay, so that's the type of data that you can make actionable for this particular situation. On the bottom right, these are other influencers. who, if Lillian is not engaging me or responding to my tweets or my DMs or even my emails, if we take it that approach, there's other people that influence her. So if we can somehow get Kirk or Craig or Bobby or Brian or Dan to share some of our content, to be a part of a co-collaborative campaign or program, then essentially we can reach Lillian because she has a much larger reach. She's much more influential, which is why we have a profile of her on this slide. Looking at this, we have the ability, so we think about social listening. How many of you know what social listening is? It's Radian 6 is like the ultimate Canadian company acquired by Salesforce. There's a lot of innovation here in Canada with data, and I'm very impressed with a lot of the platform. Hootsuite's one, Affinio is another Canadian company. So what this is looking at a group of influencers, okay? Let's say 100 influencers in security or fashion or what have you, and we're tracking their conversations over time. So we're not looking at a Boolean. We're not creating Boolean and looking at what everybody in the world is saying. We're looking at a core group of people. Maybe it's an audience of 10,000 millennials in Toronto, or it's 100 influencers in digital transformation. And we can calculate and look at what's top of mind for them now and what's top of mind for them in the past. And we can look and see, back in January, it looks like DevOps or digital transformation was a large piece of the conversation, and they were sharing information from ZDNet and DevOps. If you move to December, you can see it's different media companies, different topics, and that is essentially can help a brand in B2B in this market drive your editorial calendar, your long-form content, your brand journalism, who you pitch, how you pitch, the keywords you use, the title, the headlines. All of these things can be driven by this type of data. This is one of my favorite slides because we can do this for any audience out there, which is looking at an executive audience, what media do they read? Now, let me ask you, why would this be important to understand what your audience is reading online? Say again? You want to influence your audience. You want to reach the audience, right? So if I know, does it have a pointer on it? Do you know? I don't want to, whatever. So looking at this, New York Times, what this is saying is that 42% of the audience that we're looking at, people, read New York Times, and they index 8 times more than the average person. What that means is they are 8 times more likely to read, comment, share an article from New York Times. So the higher the index, the more calculated you can be. So if you go down the right column, MIT Technology Review, if you get a placement in MIT Technology Review from an earned standpoint, or you sponsor content through paid media on this site, you are more likely to reach an executive audience than you would if you were going to do the New York Times. So again, I'm coming at this from a B2B standpoint because I didn't have time to change it all up and make it applicable to healthcare and consumer and what have you. But put it in, think about your audience and imagine what the type of data you can pull from that. Okay, so this is very actionable because now you can, if you work in PR, how many of you work in traditional PR? Okay, good. You can take this information and you can use that to prioritize your media relations strategy for 2019. Here's an example. Harvard Business Review. 78 times this particular audience is indexed, and that essentially can turn into, and I think this is sponsored, this Harvard Business Review playbook, if you will. It's sponsored by some company. So if you're that company, perhaps you had access to data like this so that you're sponsoring, you're creating long-form content. And we're talking about social media week here, right? We're talking about social media and paid media and status updates and images and visual storytelling. But long-form content is, in my opinion, more important than all that. Because the shelf life of long-form content, whether it's earned or owned, is forever. The shelf life of a tweet, unless you're putting paid behind it, is what? A minute or two? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? LinkedIn, about the same. Facebook, the same. Snapchat, a couple seconds, right? Depending upon how you have that set up. So long-form content is really where, as I said, Google is the homepage for everyone when they're searching for information. You cannot neglect long-form content, and I'm going to talk a little about that in a few minutes. For those of you who, again, work in traditional PR, this is more focused on AR, so looking at the analyst community and how many times are quoted in the media, what type of reports are they writing. all important. I'm going to skip this because I don't think it's that applicable to this audience. So going back, we've talked about the 1%, right, the influencers. Now we're going to talk about the 9%, the core audience, okay? So what we're looking at here is basically a clustered audience, okay? So, and this is kind of the approach that I take when looking at audience. You first obviously want to define who they are, right? And then if you run, let's say, for example, you are trying to reach millennials, and I just say that because everybody talks about millennials, right? So if you're trying to reach millennials in a certain geography around certain characteristics and interests, by doing an analysis, you can find subgroups. There's still millennials in this geography who like this interest, but they're subsegments. And the subsegments have different data points, other interests, other characteristics, other media consumption. And the approach that I take when I think about social media, I don't, and I have clients who say, we need an editorial calendar for the next month. Here, go write 25 tweets a week and 20 LinkedIn updates, and then I'll approve it, and then you post it when it's on the date. That doesn't work. That does not work anymore. I mean, there's always going to be events or product launches or things like that where you're going to have to plan a content distribution approach. In my opinion, and let me actually go here. Actually, no, I don't want to go here yet. I can't figure this out. Okay, in my opinion, looking at audiences and real-time share data should be the driving force of how you're creating content from a social media perspective. And if you're fast enough and you have the right internal resources, you can write blogs or long-form content, if you can do it in the same day where you find the data and get that distributed the same day, all of a sudden you become that much more relevant to a specific audience. Here's a couple audiences that I've worked with in the past. On the left side, you have your B2B audience. On the right side, you have kind of more of a consumer audience. Now, these are just, you can take this however you want. It could be broken down by, again, geography, age, demographic. It could be broken down by other interest areas. In fact, when you do an analysis around, like sneakers, for an example, you probably find that a lot of folks who like sneakers also like sports, or also like the NBA, or also like the Los Angeles Lakers. I'm a huge fan. I'm a Laker fan. So I like the Raptors are good too. Okay, all right. Kawhi, I mean, great pickup. So again, different ways to think about audiences. Okay, and now again, thinking of this from a social listening perspective, that is still important. You still want to understand like who's talking about your brand, the share of conversation, all that stuff. But this is again looking at a core group of people first and mining their conversations. This is how it works. So you have your audience, and these are real people. These are chief security officers. You have the CSO from Facebook. Actually, he's no longer at Facebook. You have the chief security from Huawei Canada, the Slack chief security officer. These are people, so if I'm working at a security company, these are probably people I want to pay attention to, right? They're decision makers. They are the ones who are writing the checks for vendors. They're probably being influenced by people on their team, right? Internally, like, hey, I just read this white paper about, firewall security, check it out. So you identify your audience, you segment the audience, and then what you're looking at in the right-hand corner is a topic wheel. Very similar to the square topic wheel I showed you on Lillian's influencer profile. It simply shows what type of content or what topics are resonating the most among this audience. You can see big data, AI, predictive analytics, business. And again, the larger the box, the inner box, the larger volume. The outer box are subtopics of the inner box. So for example, if you look at business, the future, machine learning, innovation are all subtopics of business, okay? Now, what you'd want to do is you'd want to dig a little bit more further to understand what about business innovation is trending right now amongst my audience. Was an article written, or was there a blog post written, or was an ebook being distributed, or was there an influencer talking about innovation from a business context that's suddenly getting a lot of shares and engagement? Because then I would ask myself, if I'm in this business, well, how do I make, so here's what's happening in the market. We saw the data. Is there anything that we can align ourselves to? Is there a piece of content that we already have that we can make, if it's a blog post, or if it's a piece of social content, or it's an ebook, or it's a white paper, can we repackage it from a creative standpoint for Twitter and put some custom audiences behind that? Or even, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of Twitter. I think that's where I get all my news. And if you work in B2B, Twitter should be a platform that you're focused on. LinkedIn and Twitter, and even Facebook from a paid perspective, you can drive, it's not, in my opinion, Facebook, it's not a great place for building community within the B2B audience and building a Facebook page, but it is great for targeting people around certain topics and driving traffic to something else. How about Instagram? Instagram, I think it depends upon if you have the right content, and the question is, if you're a B2B company, is Instagram a good network to have? I would say yes. Maybe it's more of a HR standpoint or employee engagement or culture. Yeah, I'd have to think about the content to really answer that question the right way. At a high level, Instagram is definitely a consumer audience, right? We can kind of all agree to that. All right, so this is how you look at the data in real time. Again, this is the same slide, but in this case, we're looking at a larger audience, not necessarily influencers. Okay, so if this was 10,000 developers, we can see what media they're consuming and what's important. Now, this is what I love, because what this is showing is which media publications are really driving the narrative about a topic. So, for example, Forbes, the left side is volume, right? The green bars are volume. So how often are these media publications writing about a topic? The orange data is resonance, and resonance equals an interaction, and an interaction equals a social action. So, for example, if I write an article, so courts, if you look at courts, they don't write too much about this topic, but when they do, they drive a lot of engagement. So that's how you read this data. Whereas Forbes writes a lot about the topic, but generates very little engagement or resonance. Okay? So again, another data point to determine how you want to go to market with your marketing. I want to talk about branded journalism quickly, because I think this is just as important. I want to talk about this. This is called the cone of learning, okay? So it goes back to what I said earlier about integration and integrated marketing or integrated storytelling, where all of these things, after 2 weeks, we only remember 10% of what we read, okay? And you can kind of you can correlate these percentages and the way that we consume content. So I say this because it's important, again, that you have a podcast or that you have a video strategy, that you have a long-form branded journalism blog strategy, that you're integrated with earned media, that all your social content is kind of laddering up to the same narrative. Because if you're just focused on the top three, if you're in social media, well, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now, your audience is going to forget that message, okay? Unless you're hitting them on multiple touch points. Now, the thing about storytelling is, we all watch Netflix. And what's the latest Netflix show that you're watching? Just call it out there. Riverdale. My daughter watches Riverdale. I have not seen it. Is it appropriate for 13-year-olds? No, it's not. Okay, I need to talk to you about that. Okay, so we like all the, we have Amazon Prime, we have Netflix, we have all these things, and they're all stories. Like my favorite, Sons of Anarchy was one of my favorites, okay? Because the character development, I felt like I was vested in the story. There was a plot, there was an issue, there was a conclusion. Unfortunately, someone died, and I was sad about it. But the thing about storytelling is that short term, it drives emotion, right? And that's why we binge watch on the weekends, because we love the dopamine in our brains, and we love how it's making us feel, and we're invested with it emotionally, right? So from a short-term standpoint, storytelling is great. And when I say storytelling, it's not just earned and social. I mean, it's everything. The story that brands are telling online. Long term, it really changes the way we behave, right? Think about Nike and Kaepernick, right? That I'm interested to see how that's going to play out longer term, because short term, it was very emotional. Very heated, emotional conversations for people who were for and against that perspective. So we'll see, and we saw the stock price plunge and then rise back up from a Nike standpoint. So we'll see longer term, is it really going to change behavior with the NFL? Is it going to change behavior with players? Is it going to change behavior with brands who take a stand on a topic? Because storytelling does have the power to do that. Nike years ago also, just do it is their campaign. That's their tagline. They were testing different taglines. One years ago was called, I just lost my train of thought. There was an ad that came out, and it was basically, it showed a long road. And you can see a figure like maybe 300 yards away coming slowly towards you. And, oh, the slogan was called I Can, I space can, okay? Same concept as Just Do It. But you can see this person, and he's getting closer and closer and closer. And as he gets closer, you can see that it's a teenage boy probably who's overweight, who's running and doesn't stop. And to me, that was powerful because that fits into the overall narrative, right? And that was just an example of what Nike did probably 7, 8 years ago, where they're kind of figuring out how to change behavior around being able to just do it. Or if you have your mind on something and you want to accomplish a task, you can do it, okay? Same concept, and they've kind of changed the behavior. Nike's not just an iconic sports brand, right? They're a storytelling engine. When you think about building a brand journalism program, there's 5 things to consider. One is think like a publisher. We've all heard brand as media company, brand as publisher. My second book was actually about, this process. Thinking like a newsroom. What does a newsroom do? They report the news, right? Something happens, the reporter gets there, they have a creative team, they have a production team, they're filming, creating content in real time. Now, I know it's easier said than done, okay? But that's the mentality that brands have to have. Second is creative agility. If you don't have a creative person or a designer or a graphic artist or what have you, and you don't have an agency, you're gonna be stuck. Now, there's tools to use that have there's Canva and there's these kind of creative tools. If you don't have a creative person in-house, you can use these template-based creative elements, but you have to be creative. Omni-channel stories, what does that mean? Again, it's another kind of directional perspective around integrated marketing. Omni-channel means we have to distribute our story across the entire ecosystem. Data-driven content, we've kind of been talking about that. And last is customer experience. And so what is customer experience? Because a lot of times we have like WordPress blogs, or we have a blog on an older platform, and you know what, it looks like crap. It's not aligned to our .com or corporate site. And so a lot of times we create a newsroom where we just house our press releases. And I'm not saying that's not smart to do. I think we need to think beyond that, right? And think of, and I'll have a slide on that in a minute. So this is the process. Again, this is the way that I look at the world. You may have a completely different process. You may need certain elements or not. The first is brand alignment, right? So what is your purpose? What is your vision? What is your unique selling point or value proposition? Understanding that is important. At the same time, you're going to want to understand your audience. What are their interests? And does your purpose and their interests intersect? Is there alignment? Story discovery. I would bet for those of you who work in larger companies that internally there's some really smart people. Right? If you're in B2B, you have your scientists, your engineers. If you work in like an architectural firm, you have designers who are building, places like this and making it look pretty. Those are people that you could tap to write content because their voice is more trusted than us. We're marketers, we're communicators. Nobody trusts us. But your audience trusts people like themselves, which is why influencer marketing is so important, and also employee advocacy. Right? If you can get groups of employees, whether it's the CEO, CTO, or the cook, to engage in a conversation and create content, that content is more trusted than the content that you and I create. So story discovery, you have your content planning. Again, a lot of this is repeat and said in different ways. Creative production, and then, again, your omni-channel distribution. This is a mock-up, again, I wouldn't say make it look like this, but this is an example of, and Lockdown is not a real company. But what this is showing you is, rather than having a blog or a news release graveyard site on your website, why not, if you take a glance at this, it kind of looks like CNN, like real quick, right? Maybe the content isn't matching, but it's visual. There's headlines. If you look at the headlines, where you're using keywords in the headlines, you're using action words, you're driving people, when they read a headline, to take some type of action, to share, to comment, to like. By the way, all of this content then becomes indexed in Google after time, so you're reaping the benefits of long-form content, okay? Now, if you do have a blog, and that's part of your thought leadership approach, having a distribution strategy around that and packaging up creative bits and elements for Twitter, for Facebook, for Instagram, for LinkedIn, that drive people back to this is just as important as creating this material yourself. And this is exactly what this is saying. Okay, you have your brand newsroom, or for lack of a better term, your blog, okay? You have different kind of elements that you have access to. Hopefully you have a team and you're coordinated, or you have an agency who's helping you do this. But you have all these different elements. And by the way, paid social, oh wait, I have some slides on that, so I'm not gonna get there yet. Okay. Oh, it's 3:15. 5 minutes, okay. So let me, so this is an example of how you would, now I love the carousel ads on Facebook, because each one of those little boxes can tell a story. Right? I don't know if you've seen them, but I always swipe to see what the payoff is, and I might click on it or not. But here's an example from a B2B context of how you may want to distribute that long-form content in the form of visual storytelling back to your own content. Okay, strategic paid, real quick. Organic reach, paid reach. If you're not investing in paid media, you need to invest in paid media, right? You just have to. Regardless of what you do, where you work, how you work, what group you're in, if you don't have a paid media budget, you will not win. You will not succeed. It's the truth. And by the way, this data right here on the right is about 2 years old. So organic reach is even lower than that. So data. You have your audience here. You're using those top interests and brand affinities and media affinities. This is for a gaming client. If you look at the bottom, media affinities, IGN, it's a gaming media company, and Gadget Wired. You can use that data to build segments and lookalike audiences for Facebook. Or actually any. You could take all this data and apply it to any platform, given their constraints. I'm going to skip this. Actually, no, yeah, I'm going to skip this. Here's an example. Again, Lockdown Security is not a real company, but through testing, if you're not doing A/B testing, do A/B testing, because you can test creative. In this case, on the left, you have a woman. On the right, you have a man. On the left, you have kind of an ad, get our latest research. Over here, you have the title of the report. You can test colors of calls to action. You can test colors of fonts, size of fonts, right? So there's a lot of things you can test. You can test iconography. So same content, but not using humans, using icons. I love ninja. I've always wanted to be a ninja ever since I was a kid. I still want to be a ninja. So I always use this example, not just safe, but ninja safe. Last but not least, smart analytics, and this is the last slide here. Again, thinking about what it is you want to achieve and the impact. Impressions are great, right? Shares and engagement is great. But you have to think beyond that. What is the impact that this is making? So whenever you can align what you're doing to an outcome, like a download or a sale or a change in behavior, that's where you really drive innovation internally, and that's when your CMO or whoever, the owner, is going to say, here's more money. Go do more of that, okay? So with that said, I'm done. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fun.